I'm Peter Salisbury, and I'm the author of the 2015 Safer World report on federalism in Yemen. So the report is called Yemen Federalism or Fragmentation, and it really asks a question that was being asked a lot in 2014 and indeed in early 2015, which was, is federalism, this new model of governance that's being proposed for Yemen, going to solve all of the country's problems? And the ultimate conclusion that I come to in the report is that federalism was something of a red herring, but it's also symbolic of the way the international community and to an extent the Yemeni elite approached the political transition in Yemen and how divorced their worldview became from the reality that ordinary Yemenis were living on a day-to-day basis. So while there were these wonderful conversations in Sana'a about the National Dialogue Conference, about democracy, about the way that government was going to work, about the economy, about the future of the country, already really poor governance in Yemen was atrophying. People had less access to basic services than ever before: electricity, water, healthcare, justice, policing. And at one and the same time, they lived in an increasingly insecure and violent environment, and the economy was falling to pieces. So there were less jobs, and there were less economic opportunities for the average Yemeni. And at the same time, you've got people saying this new system, federalism, which will take 5, 10, 15 years to implement, will solve all of your problems. And it eventually became, just symbolic of this worldview of, we propose these grand schemes to fix the country. They're going to take forever to implement and are hugely utopian, but at the same time, realistically, or to an extent, ignore the reality of life on the ground. Let's improve governance in 5 years' time, because that's much easier than doing it now. So at the moment, there are peace talks going on in Kuwait, and those peace talks are predicated on several different things, including a UN resolution 2216, which was issued last April, which calls for a return to the transitional path that Yemen was on. And one of the core components of that path is a new constitution that was drafted in 2014 and 2015, but was never approved by this council that was formed to tick the box and say, okay, the constitution is all right. And then contained within the constitution is this concept of federalism. So the assumption seems to be that federalism will be part of future plans for Yemen. But then if you speak to some of the key players, in the Yemeni elite, there is a general sense that everything that was agreed upon during the political transition, during the National Dialogue Conference, this series of peace talks, which provided all these recommendations that formed the basis of the new constitution, all of that seems to be perceived to be up for grabs. It's open to negotiation, but certainly the Hadi government, the government of Abdul Rabu Mansur Hadi, the ousted president who now lives in exile in Riyadh, has this expectation that federalism will be a big part of Yemen's future. The answer is maybe, but as part of a much bigger, much more involved process. So if federalism is just a superstructure, something that you dump on top of the country and just say, okay, we're a federal state now, and expect everything to just fall into place, then no, federalism is not a solution, and if anything is more divisive and likely leads to renewed conflict. But if there is a focus in the run-up to the implementation of a federal system on local governance, on building up local institutions, on the provision of services, and on the provision of things like, again, justice, then there is a possibility that federalism could work. So, what are the limitations of the peace talks taking place in Kuwait right now, and what are the implications that those limitations have for the prospects for peace? Well, this is a really, really important question. In a more recent report that I published with Chatham House, the UK think tank where I'm an associate fellow, I go into a great deal of depth looking at the different groups who are actually fighting on the ground in the civil war. And one of the things that I say in this report, which is called Yemen, Stemming the Rise of a Chaos State, which is quite a grand title, is that there's this narrative, there's this story that's being told about the war in Yemen, which is that it's being fought by two very neat sides, one of which is this alliance of the Houthis, who took over the capital in September 2014, alongside loyalists of the former president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, many of them members of the military. And then on the other side, you have the rest of the military and quote-unquote loyalists of President Hadi or pro-government forces, when, of course, the reality, as is always the case in civil wars, is far more complicated than that. First and foremost, most of the best functioning, trained and equipped bits of the military are fighting alongside the Houthis and come from this wider network of power and influence that Saleh built over 33 years, where there is a military force working on behalf of President Hadi. They've had very little to do with the fighting on the ground. And that's been done by local groups, tribes, some Islamist groups, including hardline Salafis. Al-Qaeda have been fighting the Houthis on the ground, clans, local people, and just sort of general anti-Houthi fighters, people from within the network of Islah, Yemen's main Sunni Islamist party. And all of these different groups are fighting for different reasons, for sectarian, for religious reasons in some cases, although that's quite rare. And what's more common is that people are fighting for control of their local territory, for preventing someone else coming in and trying to take over. And because of historical animosities between different regions of Yemen. And in the south, many people fought on the basis that they were fighting ultimately for secession, for independence, an independent southern state along the lines of the borders before Yemen became a united state, because it only became a united Yemen in 1990. Before that, there were two different countries in the north and the south. In an area like Taz, in the central west of Yemen, it's a different story. Again, initially it was locals fighting to push back the Houthi-Saleh alliance, but increasingly there has been factionalism among the anti-Houthi resistance, which has been dominated by people from within the Islah network and Salafi fighting forces. In Marib in central Yemen, tribes are fighting to protect their land, and so on and so forth. Very few of these people really look at President Hadi or the people who are negotiating on his behalf in Kuwait as being representative of them, and certainly the deal that's being worked out looks an awful lot like an elite compact, an elite power-sharing deal, along the lines of the one that we saw worked out in Yemen in 2011. The problem this time around, though, is that in 2011, that was a deal between the most powerful armed groups in Yemen. But this time around, you've got all these emergent groups who fought for control of their local territory, who built up considerable stockpiles of weapons, but have also proven that they're willing to fight for what they want. And they're being left out of the deal. So the prediction that we make in the Chatham House report is that there's a real likelihood that even if a deal is reached in Kuwait, that will really be to satisfy regional interests. Obviously, the Saudis have played a big part in the war, as have the Emiratis, and elite level interests. but at one and the same time, it will do very little to address the conditions on the ground. So going back to this problem of the actual reality as it is on the ground, and there's a real likelihood that the big war, this sort of macro level conflict, might be brought to an end, but that we'll see that the small wars, which are the real wars taking place on the ground, will continue. So what is actually needed to build a sustainable peace in Yemen? And the answer to that question is lots and lots of things. Yemen is a really complex country, as all countries are, with lots of different interest groups, with lots of different agendas, all of who want very, very different things and control territory at a local level. And for a sustainable peace to be built, we have at the very least to understand what local grievances are and work out how governance can be adapted to actually meet the needs of the Yemeni people. So you need this grassroots approach. And that's not to say that you don't need the top-down approach, the peace deal between the elite, but that really needs to be paired with a much more involved, a much more granular grassroots approach. And this isn't an argument that's unique to Yemen. It's something that we've seen people have to take into account in Syria and Libya and various African conflicts as well. After a certain point, you can't just pretend that if you work out a peace deal between the guys from the capital city, that the conflict miraculously ends and everything gets better. So for lasting peace in Yemen to be built, it does have to be built from the grassroots and from the top down at the same time. And the danger is that policymakers will pay lip service to the need to work at the grassroots level, but will get sucked into this idea that they should prioritize elite capital level politics. And if they do that, then unfortunately, I can't really see a great deal of hope for Yemen going forward.